Welcome to the era of the analog revolution. Before the internet turned everything into a click-away commodity, we had to work for our forbidden fruit. We're talking about the 1980s teen sex comedy, a genre fueled by beer, bikinis, and a total lack of what we now call political correctness. These weren't just movies. They were survival guides for the puberty-stricken, hidden behind the couch or tucked inside a Disney clamshell case. Today, we're cracking open the vault on the raunchiest 80s films you weren't supposed to see. We're going beyond the surface to look at why these films worked, the insane stories behind the cameras, and why most of them would get a director canceled before the first trailer even dropped today. Stick around, because we're starting with the movie that literally built the peephole genre, and ending this part with a flick that actually has a surprisingly dark heart. Let's hit play. Porky's, 1981, the architect of the raunch. If there is a godfather of the raunchy teen comedy, it's Porky's. Released in 1981, this Canadian-American production didn't just break the box office, it shattered the windows of polite society. Directed by Bob Clark, the same man who gave us the holiday classic A Christmas Story, believe it or not, Porky's was a nostalgia trip back to the 1950s, but through the lens of a dirty mind. Why did it work? Because it captured the raw, unpolished reality of teenage male curiosity. The legendary shower scene isn't just about nudity. It's a masterclass in tension and comedic timing. It tapped into that universal teenage feeling that there was a secret world of the opposite sex, just on the other side of a gymnasium wall. Critics like Roger Ebert absolutely loathed it, calling it vile. But Gen X voters spoke with their wallets. On a budget of $4 million, it raked in over $111 million. Here's a bit of trivia for your next trivia night. The Porky character was actually based on a real person Bob Clark knew in high school, and that infamous scene involving Coach Balbricker and the physical evidence, it was so controversial that the studio almost cut it. But Clark held his ground, knowing that for a teenage boy in 1981, seeing a gym teacher get outsmarted was just as satisfying as the raunchy bits. Porky's didn't just create a franchise, it created the blueprint for every R-rated comedy for the next 40 years. Spring Break, 1983, the Bikini Blueprint. Before Instagram models and influencers took over Florida, we had Spring Break. Released in 1983, this movie was essentially a 100-minute music video for the Fort Lauderdale lifestyle. It didn't care about character arcs or thematic depth. It cared about beer, wet t-shirt contests, and the dream that a nerdy kid from the Midwest could find love, or at least a phone number, under the Florida sun. What makes Spring Break a fascinating relic is its director, Sean S. Cunningham. If that name sounds familiar, it's because he's the man who gave us Friday the 13th. You can actually feel that slasher movie energy in the pacing, except instead of a machete-wielding maniac, the threat is just a bunch of frat boys and overzealous cops. It was shot in just a few weeks on a shoestring budget, using real spring breakers as extras, which gives it an authentic, grimy energy that a modern studio could never replicate with CGI crowds. The plot is paper thin. Two guys go to Florida, lose their money, and try to score. But for us, it was a travel brochure for a world of zero consequences. It captured a moment in time before the legal drinking age was raised, and before responsible partying was a concept. It was loud, it was sweaty, and it made every one of us want to buy a one-way ticket to Fort Lauderdale the second we graduated. Private School, 1983, the Phoebe Cates phenomenon. If the 80s had a definitive dream girl, it was Phoebe Cates. After her iconic red bikini moment in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, every studio in Hollywood wanted a piece of that magic. Enter Private School in 1983. On the surface, it's a standard girls' school versus boys' school rivalry. But Private School was unique because it flipped the script. It showed that the girls were just as obsessed, just as rebellious, and just as curious as the guys. It offered a female perspective on the raunchy comedy, even if it was still squarely aimed at a male audience. Phoebe Cates played Christine with a mix of sweetness and spark that made the film feel like more than just a skin flick. Here's the pause button moment, Betsy Russell's horseback riding scene. In the era of the VHS, that specific frame probably wore out the magnetic tape on 1 million copies of this movie. But beyond the nudity, the film featured a surprisingly great soundtrack and appearances by 80s staples like Matthew Modine. It's a movie that sits comfortably in the guilty pleasure category. It's dated, but it represents the peak of that 80s, sun-kissed, hormone-heavy aesthetic. Up the Creek, 1984, Animal House on a Raft. Take Animal House, add a rubber raft and a river in Oregon, and you get up the creek. This is the 1984 masterpiece of zero-stakes cinema. Four losers from the worst university in the country are forced into a whitewater rafting race against Ivy League snobs and military hardasses. The star of this movie isn't Tim Matheson or Dan Monahan. No, the real star is Chuck the Wonder Dog. Chuck could drive a boat, drink beer, and hit on other dogs. He was the ultimate 80s wingman. Up the Creek is loaded with every trope in the book. The fat guy who eats everything, the nerd with the gadgets, and the requisite sabotage plot. Looking back, Up the Creek represents the summer camp subgenre of the raunchy 80s. It's about the underdog winning through cheating, luck, and sheer stupidity. It doesn't take itself seriously for a single second. It's the kind of movie you watched on a rainy Saturday afternoon on cable TV, and somehow, 30 years later, you still remember every ridiculous line. It's pure, unadulterated escapism. Manly, messy, and gloriously dumb. The Last American Virgin, 1982, the dark heart of the genre. Now, we have to talk about the outlier, The Last American Virgin. If you went into this expecting a lighthearted romp like Porky's, you were in for a brutal awakening. This 1982 film is actually a remake of an Israeli film called Lemon Popsicle, and it is arguably the most honest teen movie of the decade. While the first two acts are filled with the usual 80s hijinks, awkward sexual encounters, bad advice from friends, and partying, the third act is a gut punch. Our protagonist, Gary, is the nice guy. He spends the whole movie pining for Karen, helps her through a truly heavy and illegal situation involving an abortion, and spends his last cent to support her. He thinks he's won. He thinks he's the hero of the rom-com. Then comes the ending, the birthday party. The song Just Once by James Ingram starts playing. Gary sees Karen in the arms of the cool jerk who knocked her up and abandoned her. She looks at Gary, and there is no thank you, no movie magic. Just the cold, hard reality that being the nice guy doesn't mean you win. The camera lingers on Gary's face as he drives home, crying. It was a slap in the face for every teenage boy who thought life worked like a movie. It turned the raunchy comedy on its head and showed the emotional wreckage behind the hormones. It's the one movie on this list that actually has something profound to say about the cruelty of youth. We've only just scratched the surface of the peephole era. We've seen the birth of the genre, the bikini-clad madness of Florida, and the heartbreak of The Last Virgin. But there is so much more to uncover. Coming up in part 2, we're looking at a pre-Oscar Tom Hanks in a movie involving a donkey and a lot of questionable substances. We'll dive into Johnny Depp's shameful debut in a resort-themed sex comedy, and we'll look at why Revenge of the Nerds is arguably the most controversial movie to ever be labeled a comedy. How many of these did you have on a worn-out VHS tape? Drop a comment below with the title of the movie that made you turn the volume down when your parents walked by. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell. You don't want to miss the deep dive into the 80s bachelors and bad boys in part 2. See you in the back aisle.